Many know about slavery, but few discuss paper genocide. We did not all come from Africa, and most of us have Aboriginal roots that were stripped away due to reclassification and miseducation. As a native Black American and a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, I understand the importance of tracing your lineage. If you want to learn how to trace your genealogy and apply for tribal citizenship, go to nativeblackancestry.com to schedule a consultation.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them, and this shit get way deeper than your pigment.
All right, let's get on into it. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, smash the like button on the way in. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Make sure to check out my website, nativeblackancestry.com. I've built it out with tons of historical references to help you in your journey of discovery. You can even access a free ebook I created, Reclassified, The Hidden History of Black Indians in the Southeast from Indian to Negro. And as always, if you need personalized guidance with genealogy research, then you can access my calendar and pick a day and time to connect with me one-on-one. But guys, this is going to be a very, very interesting broadcast. Tonight, we're going to go into one of the most important but least understood chapters in Native Black American history. A chapter that exposes exactly how the United States dismantled an indigenous nation, overturned a sovereign government, stole an economy, took the oil, erased the people, and rewrote the story. Now, this chapter we're going to be discussing is called the Green Peach War, and I'll bet you $100 you have never heard of the Green Peach War. Let's get into it. And let me be clear from the start. The Green Peach War was not simply a Creek family argument. It wasn't just progressives versus traditionalists. It wasn't just a little tribal squabble. You see, it was the Creek Nation's, my tribe, the Creek Nation's final attempt to stop the United States government from carrying out full-scale racial reclassification. A paper genocide engineered through color categories, not genealogy, not ancestry, not records, not facts. Because when these men, the missionaries, the federal agents, the Indian office workers, the Dawes Commission officials, when they looked at a Creek person, they didn't ask, who are your parents? Which clan are you from? What town were you adopted in? Where is your enrollment? Who vouched for your citizenship? No, they didn't ask any of that. They just looked at dark skin and said, Negro, colored, freedman, not an Indian. Now, this wasn't genealogy. This wasn't anthropology. This wasn't science. It was lookership, pure, unrestrained, unapologetic racial profiling converted into federal policy. And the quotes prove it. Let's start with the people who designed the system. These aren't my words. These are theirs. This first quote is from U.S. Indian Inspector James R. Garfield in 1899. Quote, "The rolls must be cleansed. There are many among the Creeks who call themselves Indians, but they are in fact Negroes and should be placed on the freedmen list." End quote. Now, did Garfield research their families? Did he look at their genealogy? Did he trace their lineage? No. He looked at them. That's why we call it lookership. Next quote. This is the Dawes Commissioner, Tams Bigsby. Quote, "We are to make separate rolls, one for those who are Indians by blood and one for those who are merely freedmen. This separation is essential." End quote. Now, how did he determine by blood? Guess what? It was by skin tone, by appearance, by assumption. You guys hear about terms like blood quantum. You probably think that that involves like a blood test, a DNA test. Blood quantum has to do with what a European Dawes Commission agent visually thought your ancestor was and reclassified them as. It has nothing to do with genealogy. It has nothing to do with blood work, but still Indian tribes to this day operate under the colonial system of blood quantum. Next quote. This is from a missionary. Her name is Alice Robertson. Quote, the Indians of African blood must be removed from the privilege of the tribe. If they remain, the property allotments will be claimed by them, which would be disastrous to future white settlement. End quote. She didn't check blood. She didn't check lineage. She wasn't doing genealogy. She was doing a visual assessment. Next quote. This is from Creek leader Chito Harjo, also known as Crazy Snake. He called them out. Quote, you say we are Negroes. You write us down by color, not by nation. This is your plan to steal the land. End quote. You see, he understood exactly what was happening. Next quote, territorial judge Hosea Townsend. He said it plainly. Quote, when a Creek is of dark complexion, it is simplest to treat him as a Negro. The roles must be perfected in this manner. End quote. Guys, we're not talking about genealogy. We're talking about lookership. Next quote is from a U.S. Census supervisor. He testified to Congress in 1906. Quote, many who call themselves Creek are as dark as the Negro. The roles cannot continue this confusion of races. End quote. Notice how he didn't say, I have reviewed their ancestry. I traced their genealogy. I looked at their Creek town affiliations. No, just skin tone. Next quote is from Governor Thompson Ferguson in Oklahoma Territory. He wrote, quote, the black element among the Creeks complicates the roles. They must be assigned properly, that is, as freedmen, end quote. You see, guys, when you hear a term like freedman, you assume that this is a slave who is then free. You guys even hear myths that the freedmen of the 5 civilized tribes were like African slaves that married some Indians. Guys, this was a term of racial reclassification. He didn't say, hey, we trace this person to a West African slave. We're going to call them a freedman. He's saying they look dark-skinned, so they got to be a freedman. Come on, assigned properly, meaning assigned by appearance, right? Next quote is from Johnston Likens, a Creek agent in 1870. Quote, the nation contains a large body of people who, though belonging to the nation by law, are of Negro blood and not to be counted as Indian, end quote. Again, no genealogical research, just visual judgment. These quotes reveal the truth. Racial reclassification wasn't a mistake. It was policy. It was strategy. It was a weapon. The name itself, the Green Peach War, was propaganda. Green peach meant unripe, immature, not ready to lead. The U.S. and its Creek collaborators used that phrase to delegitimize the traditionalists, the faction fighting to protect communal land, Creek sovereignty, Black Creek citizenship, Creek industry, and the Creek economy. The Green Peach label was a branding operation meant to portray the resistors as childish, when in reality, they were the only ones who saw the coming storm. Let's talk about Silas Jefferson. This is a photo right here of Silas Jefferson, a Black Creek statesman, and he saw everything clearly. He said, quote, if they divide us by color, they will steal the land. If they call us Negro, they will say we are not Creek. And if we are not Creek, we have nothing, end quote. He clearly warned, in another quote here, he clearly warned, quote, the day that they make 2 rolls, one white and one black, is the day the nation ends, end quote. You see, Jefferson understood that a racial role is a colonial role, and once the role is racialized, the nation is racialized. And once the nation is racialized, it is destroyed. You guys see the remnants of this present day when you hear about the Creek freedmen fighting in court to have their citizenship rights restored. Let's talk about my grandfather, Thomas Jefferson Adams Harjo. He formed an economic resistance. My grandfather, Thomas Jefferson Adams Harjo. He was a Creek leader, a businessman, a strategist. He was a prominent lawyer, Chief Justice of the Muskogee Creek Nation. And he was a man who saw the economic side of racial reclassification unfolding. He helped create the Creek Oil and Gas Company, the first commercially successful oil operation in what would become Oklahoma. But you've never heard that in school before, huh? You guys have never heard that the first successful oil operation in Oklahoma was not just spearheaded by a black man, not just spearheaded by my grandfather, but was spearheaded by a Muskogee Creek Indian who's been racially reclassified throughout time. Let's talk about it. Before statehood, before corporate takeover, before the oil barons. And guess what? My grandfather actually implemented a very interesting rule. He implemented a rule that white prospectors hated. He said, if a white man, and this is a quote, if a white man wants to drill for oil in Indian territory, he must partner with 3 creeks. That's right. Why 3? Because he knew they were trying to erase black creeks. They were trying to reclassify us. They were trying to steal the land. They were trying to seize the oil. And they were doing it by looking at people and calling them Negro. This wasn't business. Nah, this was defiance. It was about sovereignty. It was about economic protection. My grandfather understood what was coming. If black creeks were reclassified as Negro, our land becomes non-Indian. Our oil becomes open to white leasing, and our future becomes white controlled. And he fought that, just like Silas Jefferson fought it, just like the traditionalists fought it. Once the U.S. backed the pro-Dawes faction and the Creek resistance was defeated, well, racial reclassification moved at full speed. The quotes illustrate exactly how the system operated. This is a quote from Dawes Commissioner Henry Teller. Quote, if there is one drop of Negro blood, he belongs with the freedmen. Such persons cannot be allowed to share in the property of the tribe. End quote. Again, no genealogy, no Creek records, no family verification, lookership. Judging people by eyes and skin. And once the categories were set, hey, black creeks went to the freedman role. Lighter creeks went to the by blood role. Everything else followed. Land theft, oil theft, guardianship fraud, disenfranchisement, loss of sovereignty, Oklahoma statehood. And that takes us directly to Sarah Rector. She is proof of what they did. Everyone knows about the movie coming out, Sarah's Oil, right? But almost nobody knows that she was a Creek Indian. She and her family were members of my tribe. But in school, they teach about her as if she's just the youngest, richest colored girl in the world. They don't lead with the fact that she was a Muskogee Creek Indian. She was a native Black Creek girl. And when her allotment hit oil, the newspapers wrote, quote, Sarah Rector is a Negro child and therefore must be provided a guardian. Again, this is by appearance. This is not by genealogy. They didn't care. They didn't care what clan she was from, who her parents were, her Creek citizenship. Nah, her enrollment, forget about it. Her lineage, nah. They just saw a dark-skinned Creek child and said, Negro, unfit, give her land to whites. And that's exactly what Guardians did. They stole land. They stole oil royalties. They forged documents. They sold leases. They enriched themselves. They impoverished Native Black children. And this was not mistakes. This was the end stage of the Green Peach War. Now you see why my grandfather had that rule with the Creek Oil and Gas Company, where any white settler trying to do business in Indian territory had to be doing business with 3 Indians. Because one-on-one, we knew how tricky they get with us. Look at what they did with Sarah's oil. Now let's talk about the finalization of the crime. You see, with the roles racialized, the children under guardians, and the oil wealth flowing, well, you know what comes next? Oklahoma statehood. That's the final step. And the politicians didn't hide it. Nah. We got a quote from Senator Porter McCumber. Quote, "Statehood will bring order. The Indian must now submit to white control." End quote. And mind you, this is after the Trail of Tears. About 50, 60, 70 years after the Trail of Tears, after we already gave up the richest agricultural land in the world, the Southeast. Look it up, guys. The richest agricultural land on the planet is in the southeastern United States. And we gave that land up. We're forced west of the Mississippi under the guise that this would be our own sovereign land. No white settlers would step foot on it. We can do our own thing. But decades later, they discover we have oil. And now they have to divide the tribe, racially recategorize us, and steal everything all over again. This is a quote from Representative Charles Curtis. Quote, "The tribal governments must be abolished. Progress requires that the Indian be placed under the law of the white man," end quote. And they actually had an act named after him called the Curtis Act, which formally dissolved all tribal governments. And once again, nothing here mentions genealogy, ancestry, or heritage. The whole system was based on eye tests, color tests, racial profiling, appearance, white supremacy. And this was paper genocide executed by lookership. Now, here's the truth. The Green Peach War, it was the last stand of the Creek Nation against a racial system designed to erase us on paper, strip us of our wealth, and steal the future of Native Black Creeks. Everyone involved saw what was happening. Silas Jefferson, my grandfather, Thomas Jefferson Adams Harjo, Cheeto Harjo, the traditionalist towns, the Black Creek, the missionaries, the U.S. agents, the Dawes Commission. Everyone knew this was about race, not records, skin, not ancestry, appearance, not genealogy, color, not culture. Tonight, we're going to go deeper than any textbook. We're going to go deeper than any documentary. We're going to go deeper than anything Hollywood will ever show you. We're going to decode the factions, the quotes, the color-based system, the paper genocide, the oil, the guardians, the allotments, the racial roles, the economic motives, and the movement America decided, the moment America decided that the dark-skinned Indians were Negroes on paper and therefore had no rights worth respecting. Now, this is the full truth of the Green Peach War, not the children's version. This is the forensic version. So let's begin. We've got my honored guest coming back. Handsome History is in the building. How you doing, Travis?
Hey, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for showing up. Now, before we get into your presentation, I know when I originally told you about the Green Peach War, you hadn't really heard much about it. And that's really by design. I just gave a great breakdown on how this was actually the last stand against racial reclassification, against everything that we saw play out in later years. But would you be surprised to learn that there has not been a single book written on the Green Peach War?
Well, maybe we should fill that void. Yeah,
Absolutely.
great. It's a great story, and it is. It's and especially the part of Silas Jefferson, it kind of represents the old world, the last of the old world, perhaps.
Most definitely. Very, very interesting piece of history. I mean, I guess we hide the racial reclassification of Black Indians by not even mentioning they had a whole war against it, right? Come on.
Oh, right. So, probably is another reason they don't talk about it. But man, I mean, it's just wild that it's 1889. I mean, just think about that, guys. That's 30 years 25 years after the Civil War. That's some of us, like I'd say, my great grandma was born like just 10 years after this. So wow, like it's not that long ago. Well,
not that long at all.
you know.
Hey, if my grandfather had his way, my family and many other Black Creek families would be descendants of wealthy oil barons.
Oh,
my family would be like the Hiltons or something, right? But no, they had to take the land, they had to take the oil, and now instead we have all these European settlers who build generational wealth off the back of stolen indigenous land that was just given to the tribes to compensate them for their original stolen indigenous land in the Southeast. I mean, you can't make this up.
No, you can't. I mean, you can't. And I do just want to say that when you look at the way they went after it by color and phenotype, it just really, I think, supports the theory that these are the indigenous, like they weren't just going after any melanated people that had like a specific look in mind, and I find that very intriguing part of it, and I guess it just speaks to, I think, the fact that it's like, yeah, they were the last group that had been in the South, still kicking it, still having power, and just now we got to finish it off this time. Don't let them back up. Don't let them back up. Don't let them regroup. That's really, I think, what's going on here in 1890, So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know what? Before we get into your presentation, a quick thing I want to share with people, since I did mention my grandfather, Thomas Jefferson Adams Harjo, the racial reclassification permeates into modern day. I mean, if I pull up the Dolls Roll right now, here's the Dolls Roll website. My ancestors' roll number is 2145. You can see right here that my ancestor successfully fought racial reclassification because he's listed on the Dolls Roll as a full-blooded Creek by blood. But despite this, we have mainstream historians at the University of Georgia, I'm talking about you, Claudio Sant, who work to racially reclassify my ancestor in his book that he wrote in 2005. His book is called Black White Indian Race and the Unmaking of an American Family. And you know what? He actually wrote a whole chapter about my ancestors. Hold on real quick. Let me log into Internet Archive so that it allows me to borrow the book. Lord knows I'm not going to buy it. Me buy a book where some ignorant PhD holder is racially reclassifying my ancestor? Nah, I'll pass on that. He needs to send me a free copy with a handwritten apology, if you ask me. But check this out, guys. Check this out. We're going to go to the chapter on my ancestors. Let me see. William McIntosh, Chester Adams, page 108. Here we go. And this is my ancestor right here, Thomas Jefferson Adams Harjo. This is another photo of him standing in front of the Creek National Council house that he built in Okmulgee, Oklahoma. Standing in front like a leader would be. Whole bunch of Black folks in the audience as well. See some white settlers sprinkled in there, or maybe these are just the fair skinned Indians, right? But check this out. We've got a whole chapter about my ancestry, and this professor Claudio Sant, this is what he says about my ancestor, who's listed on the Dolls Roll as a full-blooded Indian, mind you. He says, Mahala married Thomas J. Adams, a Creek of African descent, born in 1842. Is this not paper genocide in the 21st century? Is he not saying my ancestor is a Creek of African descent, despite him not being listed as a freedman, not being listed as a half-blood, not being listed as a quarter-blood? He's listed as a full-blooded Indian. But this Professor Claudio Sant in 2005 says my ancestor is a Creek of African descent, born in 1842. Adams became the Chief Justice of the Creek Nation in the late 1800s, suggesting that some Black Muskogees still wielded significant power. Their children were visibly African, and they spoke Creek fluently. Travis, this is not what we're talking about, the lookership? They're visibly African, so I guess you're an African because a European thinks that you look like an African. Okay, all right. The cycle continues. But hey, I'm going to go ahead and give you the floor. I know you got a presentation prepared for us, so go ahead and jump right on into it.
Yeah, I mean, the screen, like you said, it's wow. There's a lot to it, but I'll kind of give it, I think, like a detailed yet a summary. So here we go. The conventional version treats this war as a Creek family dispute, a quarrel between the progressive and the traditional factions. But I think the real conflict is actually more about the larger civilizational collision. You have indigenous communal land law going up against the European property individual title law. And then you kind of have the guys, right, that are the hybrid missionized tribal governments. So you kind of have like these three factions, really. So that's what's kind of going on here. And we're going to have kind of three players. So you have Chakotay, who's the treaty signing, missionary aligned Indian leader, right? So, you know, is he, I would be interested to know, like, if he's missionary aligned, perhaps he was hostage. You know, he could be an example once you realize about the hostaging system, how many of these guys might have spent a dozen years or something in one of these universities that I've talked about earlier. Then you have an Esparcher, who's a conservative Creek district judge. He's resisting destabilization. But the most interesting guy, the traditionalist, the representative of the indigenous civilization, in which the indigenous economic system and stuff, would be Silas Jefferson. And he's the uncompromising traditionalist. And he's like refusing the entire system. I don't want to be involved in your surveys and your property taxes and title. We don't want to be paying taxes to you. So that's what he's about. So on the textbook version, you have these outlaws in this place called the Deep Fork District and Esparcher. So the outlaws are what? They're Indian outlaws, right? Like, there's country music songs, you hear them mention Indian. What do they mean by that? Well, Indian outlaws just simply, you weren't on a reservation, you weren't one of the recognized tribes, and now you're one of these. It's like in another situation, they might just be considered a free person of color, but at the moment, they're not, playing ball or being a part of the territory. So now they're outlaws. So out goes, they're sending out officers, pistols, everything. A killing occurs. It's a really small amount of death, by the way, but basically one guy gets killed. But both sides raise a militia, right? And they have a skirmish, a place called Springtown, all right? And by the way, like 10 people total died in this whole thing. But what is going on is, like, it's the final, again, it's this clash of like worldviews and like civilizations, right? So basically, who's this Esparcher? He's like this trustee. He's sitting there like cracking down on the Indian outlaws, and at the same time, he's like trying to work a little too closely with the government. So to get all this going on, and then here's this guy, Silas Jefferson, right? He's the guy who's basically saying this: we shouldn't submit to U.S. property tax law or property law, which is the paper titles, being at the county courthouse, all that. Again, property typically assigned down to the lowest possible level, like just one person or maybe a nuclear family. Polar opposite of like community owns all the property in here, right? Very big difference, right? So he refused to accept the land surveys, like that guy coming out with the chain and compass, like, get off my land. He refused to join the current government, the Creek hybrid government. So he's already seeing the current recognized, so, the recognized government, right? And we always hear about the recognized tribes and the so-called civilized tribes. My view of that now at this point is so much as they're basically the ones that are compromised and like working in the system. I heard a Yamasee interview where they mentioned you could be recognized and or acknowledged, and I was like, oh right, so the recognized ones are the ones more that are playing ball and you have more protections, and then you have all this acknowledged but not recognized group. Got it. So yeah, I mean, everything he's about is like basically not going to be producing any tax-paying citizens to these United States. Think about it. So this traditionalist view, it's just not going to. It's really going against the tide, and we're in the 1880s, right? But he embodied what I call the Southeastern Indigenous Indian worldview. Land is not saleable, it is not taxable, and you can't parcel it out. So he was rejecting like the entire system that we're all on now. So it wasn't just rejecting any particular politician or something like that. So this guy, I mean, he's going to become an outlaw. So if you're on Team Jefferson, you're an Indian outlaw, so that might make you rethink a lot of the Wild West movies, right? Who were the real outlaws that they're talking about, right? So this just goes on, and that's how the war plays out. But let me get down to where you kind of see, like, what I like to say is in forensic history, when you're being like a forensic analyst at a crime scene, what is the investigator always ask? He always asks who benefited from the crime. So let me just go to what happened afterwards, right? And who benefited. So what do they write in? What's the legislation look like? Absolute cession of all the land to the United States, and including like these words, full title transfer. Like basically you can't make it any more of like a submission. It's like full title transfer to the United States. All Creek claims extinguished. And then the 2.28 million declared, but only 10%, 280K paid out. The remaining 2 million kept in a federal trust custodied by who? Congress. I mean, just slapping, and this is humiliation, the whole thing, right? Congress holds unilateral cancellation rights over the remaining 2 million. Get this, guys, to the assimilation, to what we're talking about, the relabeling, right? Mandatory school assimilation funding. So when they did release money from that trust to the Creeks, it came with strings attached that half of it had to be spent in these schools assimilating the children, the mission schools, right? On, and Esperanza has to place his X there. He's the guy signing on this, but guess who doesn't sign the treaty? Silas Jefferson. He's not even, of course, asked to the meeting, right? To the treaty. So that's how this war ends. And so you can see this is kind of totally setting up for things such as Dawes, because basically once this jurisdiction collapsing, basically, just to be practical here, it allows agents from the commission to really go out and basically start going door to door. And, think about it. If they had to know who the families were, right, who went with Team Jefferson, who went with Team Traditionalists, who were Indian outlaws, right? They had, that they had record, so who's going to get denied, right? I mean, you have to realize how much that had to play into it as well. They would have known, had a good sense of who was who, or who was part of, which community. So very interesting how the end of this war and then the treaty that finishes it off basically sets the stage for the Dawes Act to just really get implemented. Basically, now they can really go and question everybody and start marking down and building their database. So just to sum it up, I'll say this: the Green Peach War was an example of enforcement, right? At this point, we're going to enforce the laws that we've created. We titled this land; it's in our system. And the 1889 session is the paperwork, and Dawes is the execution. Silas Jefferson is the missing element that reveals our deeper truth. The indigenous people who refused this new European property title, tax economics, civilization, these people, all right, they were criminalized, or excluded from treaty protections, and or erased eventually through Dawes era classification. So it's just kind of the setup. This is, I guess, almost like the final, resistance. It's 1889. And it kind of completes the arc, probably from, 1492 almost. So There you go. All that just from the Green Peach War, which nobody's ever heard of.
Nobody's ever heard of. 0 books written about it. And anytime you ever do find a publication that writes about it, they'll have like a little couple sentences on it in books titled African Creeks.
Oh, oh man, of course. Yeah, they
come on.
Right,
Ooh,
right.
ooh, whenever they mention it in a little book, it's always a book about African Creeks who are trying to like pretend like they're Indian, but really they're African. I mean, this whole misnomer that we hear perpetuated to this day. And a simple adage that I'll give for my grandfather versus Silas Jefferson Jefferson. My grandfather's the Adams. A simple adage I'll give is this is like Martin Luther King Jr. versus Malcolm X. Yeah. Most people don't know, but Martin and Malcolm had communication. They had a bit of a strategy. They had Malcolm talking some rather extreme rhetoric to kind of force the white society to adopt the more tamer and politically correct programs of Martin Luther King Jr. And in that same vein, we have Chief Silas Jefferson as a staunch traditionalist, like, yo, we're not getting on your system at all. We ain't taking no land allotments. We ain't doing this. You tripping. And then we have my grandfather, who would be more like the Martin Luther King Jr. figure, where you see that he's trying to fight the system within the system. And a good example would be how he starts the first ever successful commercial oil venture in what would later become Oklahoma. But he's implementing rules where, hey, if a European settler does business with us, it has to be 3 Indians to 1 European settler, right? Another thing that he does is he actually sent, I guess you would call it a moratorium or something of the sort. But him and other Creek leaders, they actually sent letters to Congress. And I do have one of those letters right here. I would love to get Handsome History's opinion on it as well. Let me see if I got this somewhere. Here it is. Check this out. So this is the memorial of the citizens of the Creek Nation. They sent this to Congress. So on the one hand, you got Silas, who's like, hey, I ain't rocking with y'all. I'm going to be an outlaw. We out here banging. I'm shooting at Union soldiers, right? And then you got my grandfather, who's like, we are going to sit down and formally send some paperwork to Congress and try to fight this within the system, right? So check this out. This is the memorial of citizens of the Creek Nation remonstrating against the establishment of a territorial government for the Indian Territory. And this is February 6th, 1875. Lord, I got to cut to a quick commercial break. Come on. If this is how in-depth I can get with the receipts, live and direct with you all, imagine what I can help you discover about your family's genealogy.
I'm so glad that, I even, experienced this. I'm glad I experienced you from, enlighten me from the internet to, online, getting one-on-one in depth, giving me a lot of information that I can take back to my people as well. And hopefully we could both get the everything meshing with everything with the lineage and everything with the genealogy. This is no scam. This is all real. This is a real homeboy that put it down. He mean what he say. He got receipts and he put it down. He stands on business. Straight up. One love.
Let's get into the receipts, shall we? This is February 6, 1875. Referred to the Committee on Indian Affairs and ordered to be printed. January 26, 1875, to the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States in Congress assembled. The memorial of the undersigned citizens of the Muskogee or Creek Nation respectfully showeth that they have heard with surprise that the Board of Indian Commissioners has officially reported as the results of the late conference at Muskogee Indian Territory, with delegates representing the 5 principal nations and tribes in the Indian Territory. Their belief that if Congress should, without delay, provide a territorial government for the Indian Territory, such action would receive the hearty endorsement of a great majority of the inhabitants of said territory. The undersigned are unable to conjecture the grounds upon which the belief is founded, as it is contradicted by the statement of every one of the 33 delegates with whom the conference was held, who presented their views in certain resolutions embodied in the report of the commissioners, one of which sets forth as a grievance the introduction into Congress of bills for the organization of such territorial government. So let's pause right there for a moment, guys. They're basically saying, my grandfather and others are writing to Congress saying, yo, y'all out here lying, saying that in the last meeting, a bunch of Indians was on board with you and said, yeah, give us a territorial government, when in actuality, most of us are against it. And we've been vehemently against it. And you know we're against it. That for ourselves, we do not know and have not heard of a single citizen of our nation who would not deeply regret the passage of any such bill, and would regard it as a source of unmixed evil, for the reason that a territorial government is regarded by everyone who has any knowledge of the subject, whether for it or against it, as the entering wedge to the opening up of the Indian country to the settlement of whites. My grandfather and them said, yo, we know what y'all doing. Don't lie and say that we down with you giving us a territorial government. We know that's the first step of you invading our territory with white settlers. Come on. Anybody who has any knowledge of the subject knows that this is evil, because it's going to enter the wedge to the opening up of the Indian country to the settlement of whites, upon which nearly every friend of the Indian looks as his final destruction. They knew that our final destruction would be Oklahoma statehood, and that's exactly what happened. After Oklahoma statehood, we get Jim Crow, the Klan, racial segregation, racial reclassification. I mean, come on. This is the one general feeling existing among all classes of the Muskogees or Creek people, who constitute 1/4 of the population of the 5 nations residing in the Indian Territory. The Choctaws, who are equal to 1/3 of the population of the territory, were not represented in that conference, but their feeling and sentiments were shown a few months ago in the election of their present principal chief, who received 3 times as many votes as all his 3 competitors combined, because he was well known to be an uncompromising enemy to any form of a territorial government, although none of his opponents nor any other Choctaw citizen favored such a government. The same feeling prevails amongst the Chickasaws and the Seminoles. The only apparent show of strength in favor of a territorial government is in the remaining nation, the Cherokees. And guys, we've had funny quips about the Cherokees for centuries. Tribes, my tribe would talk about how the Cherokees are so white, how they've been mixing with white people for so long. Everybody knows the Cherokee be on some ultra sellout type shit. And they saying the only one who's kind of in favor of the U.S. government coming through and fucking up us and destroying us is the Cherokee. Big surprise. Out of 4,500 votes in that nation, the undersigned are informed that those favoring such a government number less than 100. None of whom, so far as the population of the territory is concerned, can be regarded as representative men. Their champion, Colonel Boudinot, does not live in the territory. And although he is of Cherokee blood, so we got a mixed breed, we got a half European, half Cherokee motherfucker, Colonel Boudinot. Although he is of Cherokee blood, he expresses the views and opinions of the white man and not of the Indian. Tell me my grandfather and them wasn't standing on business from day one. God, if they aren't reading them for filth right now. So we understand, so well understood are all these facts in the Indian Territory that we are satisfied the commissioners would not have failed to arrive at a correct conclusion as to the state of public opinion amongst us, had not one of their members been led by former associations to consider the territorial question from the standpoint of the Atlantic and Pacific Railway Company's interests. They knew that they got corporations trying to come through and build railroads and monetize and mechanize the land and bring settlers over here, and they spoke against it. Formal letter to Congress. We know that it is the public opinion amongst us that not one of their members been led by former associations to consider the territorial question from the standpoint of the Atlantic and the Pacific Railway Company's interests, which is dependent upon the opening up of the Indian country to the extent of 6,000 square miles of Indian lands, with hopes that our sentiment, as herein set forth, may meet with your favor and be considered by you as from those whose very existence you have in your charge. We are very respectfully your humble memorialists. And down here, we've got the different Indian leaders, many of them Black Creek leaders, leaving their mark. They would literally sign an X as a mark. And my grandfather's signature, Thomas Jefferson Adams Harjo, is on the last page right here. Thomas Adams, member of the National Council. Damn. What do you think about this, Handsome History? If this doesn't have a weird intersection with what you talk about with the trusts and the corporations and
yeah, I mean the corporations, man. I mean the whole thing is once you Black Hawk had a saying too when it's surrender treaty, when he was just like they're gonna have more like officers than people. Like he's like, you see the system they're on, all this paper titles and all this foreclosure and all this bankruptcy and stuff. And he's like, all these extra, officers and agents got to watch everybody in jails, And he's like, this is what you're gonna get, because he was, seeing it the same way. And it was like, there's the older trust of the other civilization that. They were still protecting or still trying to live out. It's hard to believe now they're still trying to live that out all the way close to 1900. All things considered, it's pretty amazing. You think about it. But I also think that's what was happening too with like the Seminole War, just rooting it out like anywhere. They just weren't at some point going to allow it anymore. You're going to have to go onto a reservation, right, and be contained that way. Where you could have a lot of that community, communal sharing, property sharing, but it was going to be there, right, on these specific boundaries. They were not going to allow within you weren't going to be able to form a county within the United States system and do it. So, that's what they were doing, and so now they want to make you second class and get you Black on that system, and then the KKK, so that you don't. You can kind of see like the whole setup at that point.
Oh yeah, here's the setup, guys. The KKK was not just some racist white boys who want to lynch some Black folks. They were a hired militia, a hired mercenary group. They were the Halliburton. They were the Blackwater. They got hired by corporate entities to terrorize these Black Indians off their land so the railroad companies can come through and the oil barons can come through and they can start drilling.
Right. Pinkertons involved, same guys that were working for the robber barons to put down strikes, and they would infiltrate unions in the working class.
And if you haven't played Red Dead Redemption 2, the Pinkertons started as a private detective agency. That's the modern that they created the FBI. They morphed over time into the Federal Bureau of Investigations. It goes back to the Pinkertons. Look them up.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. So yeah, it's all it's all right there.
Now, a couple things I want to touch on, because during your presentation, some things really stood out to me. You mentioned how the Indians get rebranded as outlaws if they're traditionalists, right?
Yeah,
And this is something that most people don't understand. Just like people think that Negro and mulatto are differentiating terms when really both classes of them are indigenous. It's just if you're lighter skin, they call you a mulatto, or maybe you have mixed heritage, so they call you a mulatto, whereas if you're darker skin, you're a Negro, right? Well, in that same vein, people think that like outlaws and cowboys and Indians are differentiating terms. We were the Indians, we were the cowboys, we were the outlaws, okay? Look it up. How do you think that there's these Black cowboys who know how to work the land and herd animals and stuff? These are indigenous people playing within the new colonial system. The ones who are traditionalists, they're outlaws now. And the ones on a reservation system, they're represented as Indians. You see how that works?
Right. And then when they see one of these Indian outlaws walking down the street, they'll call him a Negro. They're not going to call them an Indian. They don't give them the so you know what I mean. So they start to play that game where the guys that go on the reservation they'll call Indian, but not the Indian out. You know what I mean? So the Indian outlaw, like when they're writing about him, they'll call him a Negro. You see what I'm saying? Like if they're describing, you know, so it's kind of interesting. Like they're never going to give that guy. They're not going to give you the Indian anymore. They're not going to let you. You got to go on that reservation, or it gets It's intriguing. Like once you realize, they're really going after this group of people. You know, they must be, really hate Africans. Like once I'm thinking that's like it really gives the lie to me. Like, what, they're really going after this group.
Come on. What makes more sense, that these are Africans that they never called African until 1980s, right? Or are these descendants of the original indigenous people of this land who were expert agriculturalists, expert system engineers, expert architects? I mean, now you see how we built this country, because before it was this country, it was our country. I mean, come on.
Yeah, even that word architect, I bet you is an Indian word, because you already have Toltec as tech, like you already have tech.
Oh.
Of course, I guarantee you that's English. Yeah, there's so much of the English language is what they heard Indian words and reused them. That's how I caught on the Yankees comes from Yangisi. And so I'm seeing that over and over again. How much of the English language was and then that's a new English word.
It gets deep.
Loud stuff. Anyhow, it's a whole other. We had another program, but yeah.
Oh yeah, no, most stuff. Now, another thing that really stood out to me here is refresh our memory again. How much money did you say was promised to the tribes for adopting this new colonial territorial government, and then how much was actually given to them, and what were the stipulations?
Right. So what's put into the trust fund is $2.8 million. What's paid out to them initially is 10% of $280,000. But that $2 million that remains in the trust fund is completely under the control of Congress. So it's like, you don't have any independence. It's like they have all the money. So that's literally like in the treaty, in the legislation.
Damn, that's wild. That's why. So again, you said it was how many million that were promised
in those days? 2.8 million in those days.
2.8 million in those days. Damn, hold on, I gotta do the conversion. When we say those days, these are like 1890s, right?
Yeah. So and even just doing it for inflation wouldn't be fair. You'd almost have to give it like a real estate appreciation thing. How much.
In today's currency, and of course this is still going to be on the low end, right? In today's currency, that is $747 million.
Yeah, so that's almost $1 billion. So I would say, like, it's at least $1 billion, like in today's money. Would be a fair thing to say. Yeah. That was supposed to be paid out, and then it's only and then what they did is they only paid out $100 million, and then they kept the $900 million in the trust fund under control of Congress.
And if you guys want this money, you got to do what we say when we tell you to do it.
Right. And remember what I said, within that money, guys, they would say, okay, we're going to spend some more this year, but X amount has to be spent on what? Mandatory assimilation. That's code for those missions. They were actually using money owed to you to fund those missionary Indian schools.
Damn, that's sick.
Think about that for a second.
That is sick. They took the wealth that we were supposed to get, flipped it, and then oh Lord. That is wild. Conditions.
Yeah. So that's it. That's actually a very common dynamic. When I've looked into you go all back to the 1600s, there's always this like annuity payout where they pay out a bit up front, and then as long as you behave well, then anything the tribe, one misdeed just blows up the whole thing, and now they can take everything. So this is just 1889 happening, but this is like pretty much the format what I've seen.
Yeah, that's nuts. And you know what? There was a comment from the audience that I wanted to highlight earlier. Let's check this out. Who is this? Mata says. Ilamata says, been doing some genealogy work and found the people that enslaved my ancestors were hopping from Indian territory to Indian territory, taking land.
enslaved in place, right?
Yeah.
Like just going from, and that's what you realize, like, Columbus writes about it. What does he do? He takes slaves back to Europe. I mean, there's, that's a whole nother story. All the Indians sent to Europe and what happened to their descendants. But most of the slave trade we're talking about is actually the internal slave trade. Yes, they're on boats because they're moving them up and down the Atlantic coast and up through the rivers, east west. So yeah, like I said, the Indians were in the hydrology transportation system. So yeah, that's why you have slave ships. Really, like it's pretty wild. That explains it.
Come on. And real quick, we're pressed for time, but I want to bring up one more thing and reply to this comment. Boone says, so the copper color Indians never received anything. No, they got something. They got pennies. I mean, Sarah Rector got to be called the richest, youngest colored girl in the world, but really she got pennies in comparison of the wealth that was really owed to her, right?
Well, so the answer to that question is it depends. I mean, obviously the guys who sold out the earliest did the best. Like the more you get into this, the more you realize, like, at some point, like the United States, this thing called the United States had enough control of things in the 1800s where it just started to just press full bore. But when you read into the 1600s, that's why we're pointing out that Marangamus earlier. That guy was wheeling and dealing up there in the Hudson Valley, tracts of land patents, and against Van Rensselaer, against these big colonial names. He was respected, That's 1750. So I think what happens is the patience wears thin, like in the mid 1800s, and they're like, okay, we're going to take out the South. They've stiffed us on the loans, yada, yada. They're not going to get on our system. We got to go in there. And you guys also who haven't gotten on board, you had your chance, Osceola, too late, buddy. We're just going to go after every single one of you now. Like, yeah. So,
well, hey, before we wrap up this broadcast, the last thing I want to share super fast is coming through with the buzzer beater for the brother who is like the folks moved from India, the plantation owners, the slave masters moved from territory to territory, Indian territory, right? Check this out. This is on my website. You can access this in the digital archive. Instead of saying the N-word with a hard R, I'm going to substitute that for grr, right? It says here, the Gur Steelers done stole me and my mommy out the Choctaw Nation up into Indian territory when I was about 3 years old. Brother Knox, sis Hannah, and my mommy and her 2 stepchildren was down on the river washing. The Gur Steelers drive up in a big carriage, and my mommy just thought nothing because the fort was near there and people were going on the road, stopping to get water for the horses and resting a while in the shade. By and by, a man comes by with a carriage to the biggest children, tells them to get in coaxes them to get into the carriage and gives them some kind of candy. Other children sees this and go too. 2 other men was walking around smoking and getting closer to mommy all the time. When he can, the man in the carriage got the 2 big stepchildren in with him, and me and sis climbed in too to see how come. Then the man holler, "Get that old one and let's get from here." With that, the 2 big men grabbed mommy, and one fought, and she scratched and fought and bit and cried, but they hit her on the head with something and drug her in and throwed her on the floor. The big children began fighting for mommy, but one of them men hit him so hard, and then off they drive under the horse's whip. This was near a place called Baggy Depot. They went down the Red River, crossed the Red River, and down in Louisiana to Shreveport. And that's where they're sold at a slave auction block in Shreveport, Louisiana, stolen from Choctaw Indian Territory. Come on.
Oh.
Come on.
Yeah, I mean, that's it, man. I mean, it makes a lot more sense. And by the way, it's just also like historically how these dynastic corporations, and this is, they enslave, that's always the way they try and do it, because that's the expertise. The whole idea is to just put new management in and then squeeze out more yield. That's why the complaint of the abolitionists when they are traveling through the South before the Civil War is that the slaves are lazy. Like, it's not that there's not plenty of cotton, the most amazing cotton produced, so it's just that, man, we could have them producing more cotton, darn it. We should make.
Absolutely. And with that said, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we got to wrap up this broadcast. Handsome History will be back next week. Make sure to check out his YouTube channel, Handsome History, as well as his website, American Ancestry Decoded. And we'll see you guys next time.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British, man. Quite frankly, you was kings Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them. And this shit get way deeper than your pigment.